From hiring hitmen to drugging their customers, Coca-Cola has a long history of controversies that has built this company into the #1 world-renowned recognized brand of the last century. And it all started with Dr. John Stiff Pemberton, the founder and creator of Coke, who was also a junkie, blow pusher, and Confederate officer fighting to keep slavery intact. Dr. Pemberton was a pharmacist born in 1839 in Knoxville, Georgia. I believe most would consider a pharmacist to be a reputable profession, but I guess that just wasn't enough for Dr. Pemberton. For reasons not explicitly stated, he decided to enlist in the Army, became an officer, and joined the Civil War in 1862. The Great Civil War. That was a peaceful time for American unification, wasn't it? Well, that would be a big yes and no. No, due to the unfortunate estimated total death count being anywhere from 618,000 to 850,000. This devastation saw the death of both black and white people in America. Now, for the yes. It seems that the internal conflict of American slavery was bound to end in war at some point. This war was part of the stream of events for liberation of black Americans, though issues of racism may persist today. The divide over this issue was injected into the DNA of this plucky little startup nation from its birth. Alright, how does this connect us to the history of Coke? The founder and creator of Coke, Dr. Pemberton, was seriously wounded on the front lines of the battle for the Confederate state of Georgia, one of the states that succeeded from the nation to preserve slavery, of which also was his birthplace. I guess now you can call him some sort of war hero, since he did become seriously wounded. Well, several sources state that he was almost killed in April 1865, so we'll go with that. To ease his pain, our Civil War hero began self-medicating with the highly addictive morphine. In 1886, Pemberton wanted to cure his morphine addiction, so he created a tonic. We're talking 21 plus years of being addicted to morphine. That's a real long time. Our war-decorated pharmacist heard that cocaine could help, so he created his tonic. Pemberton's French wine coca was the name. That was based on the French chemist Angelo Mariani's tonic called Vin Mariani. Their tonics were pretty similar, but a bit different. Pemberton's tonic consisted of 3 main ingredients: extract from the leaf of Peruvian coca, the purest wine, and the cola nut. The one thing that Mariani didn't have in his. Alright, let's talk about the coca leaf for a moment. It's said that South American Indians consider the coca plant to be a sacred herb and praise its beneficial effects on the mind and body, and that with the coca plant they performed, I quote, astonishing feats without fatigue, end quote. We bet they did. I'd be performing astonishing feats without fatigue too if I were coked out. It just so happens that Pemberton's French wine coca was advertised as, and I quote, the great and sure remedy for all nervous disorders such as mental and physical depression, neuralgia, loss of memory, sleeplessness, etc. End quote. Interesting. Basically, Pemberton added caffeine on top of the cocaine. Whoa. I mean, you have stimulants in the coca plant and cola nut, and the downer from the wine. We're no drug experts here, but that's relatively close to speedballing, right? Did you know that mixing cocaine and alcohol creates cocaethylene and causes a heightened state of euphoria? Keep in mind, this tonic was produced and sold legally. Times sure were different back then. Why, I'm envisioning people doped up and fiending for more. No wonder he died just 2 years later in 1888. Okay, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Let's back up for a moment. On May 8, 1886, Dr. Pemberton's tonic was first sold to the general public in downtown Atlanta, Georgia at Jacob's Pharmacy. The aforementioned recipe was combined with carbonated water and made to be a soda shop beverage. Soda fountains in Atlanta pharmacies were fashionable gathering places for middle-class whites. It was initially sold as medicine because people were feeling good after they drank it. I wonder why. Unfortunately for old Doc, later that same year Prohibition was enforced in Atlanta. So, by law, Pemberton had to remove alcohol from his tonic, but Coke was okay? I mean, it does make sense seeing that cocaine was legal back then. Anyway, he had to switch things up, so he took out the alcohol and replaced it with sugar syrup and changed the name from French wine cola to Coca-Cola, the temperance drink. The formula switch up didn't last long, however. When Atlanta repealed its prohibition laws in 1887, he reverted to his original tonic. Cocaine cola shots, anyone? After a couple of years of drinking his own creation, it turns out Pemberton was still addicted to morphine, and his addiction was spiraling out of control. Desperate, He saw no other recourse but to sell the company. The same addiction that he created Coca-Cola to help cure him of, he ended up selling because it wasn't the cure at all that he claimed it to be. You would think that a licensed pharmacist knew what he was getting himself into. Think about it. He went from morphine to Coke, back to morphine. Well, like all of us humans, he was a mess from the start, so it shouldn't be too surprising. While Pemberton himself retained controlling shares, he also gave shares to his son and sold off the other shares to his partners, one of which was fellow pharmacist Asa Griggs Candler, right before dying in 1888. Candler eventually bought the rights and formula for a mere $2,300. That's around $55,000 US today. When Pemberton's son died in 1894, broke and addicted to morphine, an unfortunate case of like father, like son, Candler gained control of his shares. Under Candler's leadership, Coca-Cola began being sold nationwide in 1895. He changed the marketing from being medicinal to a refreshing beverage. It was the top soda fountain beverage by then, and sales increased over 4,000%. Dude wasn't playing around. In 1899, the company pioneered its distinctive glass bottle so it was no longer exclusive as a fountain drink in soda shops. This meant anyone with a nickel could buy Coke. And when we say anyone, we mean black people, and boy were they hot about that. So hot that many whites started to blame crime on cocaine-addicted black folk. Yeah, it's a bit of a reach, but nonetheless historical. Southern newspapers reported that, I quote, Negro cocaine fiends, end quote, that's harsh, were raping white women and that police were powerless to stop them. Due to the outrage in 1903, Candler caved and removed the coca leaves, but trace amounts of cocaine were still included in 1929, at which point the drink was produced totally cocaine-free. Let me tell you, people were not happy about that either. Seems like they need to make up their minds on what they really want. Should it be surprising that African Americans were not meant to have access to Coca-Cola? The founder was a Confederate officer. Also, you'll recall we said that Coca-Cola was sold in soda shops where the intended consumers were only white middle-class Americans. Plus, all marketing was directed toward the white middle-class Americans. To further prove this point, let's take a moment to look into the Civil Rights era and its relationship with Coca-Cola. In 1960, about 74 years after Coke was first invented, 4 African-American college students sat down at a counter at a Woolworth soda fountain in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were refused service, one of those items being a simple glass of Coca-Cola. The following year, soda fountains in Atlanta, Georgia were desegregated. We suppose some sort of applause is warranted, but before we spike the football, let's dig a bit more. 4 years later, a civil rights icon received his Nobel Peace Prize in Atlanta, Georgia. You may have heard of him. It was none other than Martin Luther King Jr. That's right, Atlanta, Georgia, the birthplace for both MLK and Coca-Cola, and where their production headquarters resides to this day. Invitations for this Nobel Prize celebration dinner went unanswered. So, the then mayor of Atlanta, Ivan Allen, pleaded with the former Coke CEO Robert Woodruff to help. Apparently, he still had a lot of clout back then, though he no longer served as CEO. Woodruff asked J. Paul Austin, who held the role of CEO of Coke at the time, to intervene. It is said that Austin called together critical Atlanta business leaders to the Commerce Club's 18th floor dining room, where he said, quote, "It is embarrassing for Coca-Cola to be located in a city that refuses to honor its Nobel Prize winner. We are an international business. The Coca-Cola Co. does not need Atlanta. You all need to decide whether Atlanta needs Coca-Cola Co." Wouldn't you know, it worked, and it is estimated about 1,600 people showed up. Yeah. Well, that was all well and good, but not good enough. As we are about to learn, Coke had issues treating black Americans equitably. Hiring, pay rates, and promotions had little to no progress in the following years of desegregation, especially in states and businesses resistant to integration, among which Coke found itself. So, Dr. King did what he believed was right. 4 years later, in 1968, only 8 years after the Woolworth boycott, King was in Memphis, Tennessee, where he delivered the famous mountaintop speech, where he addressed economic inequality from major corporations. Dr. King said, quote, "God sent us by here to say to you that you are not treating his children right. And we've come by here to ask you to make the first item on your agenda fair treatment, where God's children are concerned. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, we do have an agenda that we must follow. and our agenda calls for withdrawing economic support from you. And so, as a result of this, we are asking you tonight to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis." End quote. As we all know, Dr. King would be assassinated the next day on April 4th, 1968. This was one of his last calls to action. That wouldn't be the last of racial claims involving Coca-Cola. They've had numerous lawsuits filed against them over the past several decades, but the most costly one occurred in 1999. Current and former employees alleged racial discrimination under the U.S. Civil Rights Act regarding pay, promotions, and performance evaluations. They also alleged salaries for African American employees was about 1/3 less than that of white employees within the company, and the glass ceiling and glass wall policies kept African Americans from rising to top positions, and in particular departments within the company. In 2000, Coca-Cola agreed to pay a $192 million settlement, one of the largest settlements ever in a corporate racial discrimination case. In the settlement agreement, Coca-Cola denied the allegations, but agreed to make sweeping changes to its personnel policies and procedures. So, basically, here's some money to make this go away. That wasn't the last claim though. We just don't have time to delve into them all. But wait, there's more. I know, right? It just keeps coming. In 2021, Coca-Cola came under fire again, but this time from conservative critics. They accused the drink brand of reverse racism. They said that Coca-Cola used a training video that encouraged staff to try to be less white. The content of a training session was leaked by Coca-Cola employees who sent pictures of slides asking white people to be, quote, less ignorant and less oppressive, end quote. As if drugging people and facilitating racism weren't bad enough, Coca-Cola has also been accused of murder. Well, of hiring hitmen. Does that sound better? It allegedly happened in Colombia, but the case was handled in the U.S. federal court in Miami, Florida back in 2001. Basically, the Colombian trade union, Sinal National Union of Food Workers, alleged that Panamco, the Colombian Coca-Cola bottling company, assisted paramilitaries in killing several union members and injuring workers. The case was dismissed, but still, it's out there. To this day, Coca-Cola denies that there was ever any cocaine in their beverage. Why though? Times were different back then. I mean, when they first came out, Coke was illegal, so why be ashamed to the point of outright saying that it didn't happen? Sorry, but it did. Then there's Coke's history of racial discrimination accusations. What do we expect from a company whose founder was a Confederate Army officer? And the fact that the original customers were intended to be white only. That's never been a secret. But are we guilty for the sins of our father? Maybe not, but it's what you're doing to fix them. They're not the first company to be accused of such, and they certainly won't be the last. We hope you enjoyed the journey into the dark history of Coca-Cola. Don't forget to react to this video and share your thoughts with us. We'd love to see them. Until next time.